Czech astrophysicist Jakob wakes up in his ship thousands of miles from Earth. His day starts with a call from the flight curator and close friend Peter. Today, the people of Earth want to communicate with the hero. The head of the Czech space program, Tuma, greets the brave pilot as he has been on a solo flight for 189 days already. The thing is, for 4 years, a mysterious cosmic phenomenon, which has been named Chopra's cloud, has been observed from Earth. To study its origin and composition, Jakob was sent to Jupiter. In just a few days, he will be able to take samples, which may help unravel the mysteries of the universe. The captain is asked questions, and suddenly a girl sympathizes with him, as he is the loneliest person in the universe. But Jakob assures her that it is not so. Yes, he is 500 million kilometers away from Earth, but nearly half the distance has been covered and he will soon return home. Moreover, his beloved wife Lenka constantly supports him, with whom he is in direct contact through the latest quantum communication system, which is faster than the speed of light. So Jakob does not suffer from loneliness. TV takes a commercial break where a cheerful Jakob praises the products of a generous sponsor. But the astronaut immediately frowns, and it becomes clear that he is a tired man who has not slept for a long time. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lenka records a message to her husband, apologizing for leaving him because she is not needed by him. But the flight curator stops the file from being sent and passes it to Tuma. On the ship, Jakob repairs the toilet again, grumbling at Peter. But the latter is more concerned about the malfunctioning cameras. He also notices the astronaut's tired look and advises him to get some sleep. Jakob asks to contact Lenka because she somehow does not respond to his calls, and he promises to find out the reason. The man begins training when Tuma reviews his wife's message. The woman sincerely worries for the family and does not intend to pass this message to Jakob. Lenka is packing her things at this time and does not respond to her husband's messages. Distressed, Jakob drowns his sorrows in sweets and tries to sleep, watching the approaching Chopra's cloud. At night, noises from the malfunctioning toilet keep him from sleeping. He gets up unrested and even more tired, and looking at himself in the mirror, suddenly notices strange movement under his skin and tentacles protrude from his mouth. Jakob is horrified, trying to pull something out of himself and wakes up. He starts the day on the treadmill, then prepares to equip the apparatus for sample collection. Half of the ship's cameras are out of order, and no one understands why. The thought of Lenka, who still does not make contact, disturbs him. And one day Jakob suddenly hears an unfamiliar voice offering help, but Peter hears nothing of the sort. True, there is a chance that Jakob intercepted the transmission of the Korean mission, which started after the Czech one, but the language was not Korean at all. Later, the friend informs that Lenka went to her mother's, so she will contact her husband when she returns. Jakob calms down a bit and continues his work. He inspects the compartments and suddenly sees a huge hairy spider in one of them. He closes the doors to the compartment and contacts Peter. But precisely in this part of the station, the camera has long been broken and he can see nothing. Jakob opens the doors, but the spider has not gone anywhere. Moreover, it starts a conversation, stating that it did not intend to scare the human. Then the astronaut locks himself in the airlock and informs Peter that he wants to decontaminate the ship. He gets into a spacesuit, says the password that triggers the system, and the surrounding space is filled with disinfecting foam, the color of which reminds him of a summer morning in the field where he and Lenka walked. But then the cleaning is over and Jakob emerges from the airlock. However, the spider hasn't gone anywhere. It informs him that the strange bath arranged for it by the human did not harm it and suggests removing the spacesuit. It is not dangerous. Jakob reaches out to it, but the spider dodges. Such is not the custom in its tribe, so it's better for the human not to do this. It is an explorer too who accidentally found Earth. It studied life on the planet for 3,158 years and even learned Earth's languages, but never understood the essence of the human soul. And when it met Jakob, it felt his loneliness and came here. Unable to accept what was happening, the astronaut hides in the sleeping compartment, but he immediately starts to vividly see and hear his wife. Jakob moves to the station's room, where Lenka appears before him again. It turns out the spider is broadcasting the human's memories because it is very interested in these strange feelings. And it wants to help him overcome emotional difficulties since his companion is leaving. Jakob tries to refuse the help, but the spider does not believe him. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lenka arrives at her mother's because she is pregnant and cannot be alone. Nearby is a boarding house where pregnant women live together, and she decides to stay there for a while. The mother does not understand her, as one cannot leave her husband right now. At the station, the spider asks the astronaut to give it some of his food, and he treats it to nut paste, the taste of which reminds it of its lost home. Its planet was destroyed by an enemy attack, and it fled and wandered through space for a long time. At this time on Earth, Tuma goes to Lenka. The woman is convinced that the wife cannot leave her husband right now. After all, she knew he was a very peculiar person. These qualities help him stay alone for many days, but Lenka is pregnant and suffers from loneliness. The spider tells the astronaut that Chopra's cloud consists of particles that contain wisdom. It cannot say how old it is, but everything has a beginning and an end, even the universe. The spider shows Jakob his first date with Lenka when she suggested they always follow each other, and he agreed. And he does not understand why make promises that you cannot keep, but Jakob has no answer. Later, he asks the spider to save some nut paste, and it reluctantly gives back the can. At this time on Earth, Lenka confesses to her mother that, although it is hard to raise a child alone, she is ready for it. And she will tell her daughter that she loved her father very much at first, but was mistaken. And at the station, Jakob suddenly wonders about the spider's name and suggests naming the creature Hanus. His father told him about a master who lived in ancient times, who created astronomical clocks, for which the king ordered him to be blinded. The spider agrees to accept this name. Later, the astronaut plays music from the opera Mermaid and explains what it is. The spider immediately demonstrates his date with his wife when she appeared before him in a naiad costume, but the man does not want to remember this. At night, Jakob again has nightmares, this time related to his father, who was a communist and died because of his beliefs. But the spider comforts its friend. There is no need to worry about the past, as the universe is as it should be. Later, Hannes watches in surprise as Jakob exercises, and Jakob explains that humans must do this in space, otherwise their limbs could fail. Hanus doesn't understand why leave the home planet then. At this time, Tuma visits Lenka. The woman tries to reach out to the wife's feelings, but she does not want to return to the past. Then the head says she will not pass her message, and the whole point of the silence surrounding their talks is that inside they are together. Meanwhile, there are only 45 hours left to reach the cloud. And then Lenka's voice spreads through the station. Jakob rushes to the transmitter and sees his wife's face on the screen. They talk about the past and the future when he sees a glowing particle in front of him, which Hannes calls the beginning. Jakob tries to catch it in a jar, but the particle freely passes through all surfaces. Suddenly, the ship loses all communication, and then Chopra's particles start swirling everywhere. Hannes calms the human. The beginning will not harm him, so there is no need to fear. It is a regular repository that cannot be described in human language. And then it asks why the arrival of a child so upsets Lenka. Because her feelings smell of fear. Jakob explains that they lost their first child, and he was not there then, nor now. For what? The spider shows Jakob their conversation when he promised to be there, but he lied to his wife, and she stopped believing him. Later, Jakob finally gets through to Peter on the quantum phone, but Hannes again turns on the man's memories where he and his wife discuss his journey. He was so confident that he didn't even try to understand his wife. The spider realized that Jakob is selfish, and he is to blame for his loneliness. So it lost interest in him and wants to leave. This causes a panic attack in the astronaut, who no longer wants to be alone. Jakob tries to grab the spider, but it itself presses the man's body to the bulkhead and reminds him that it preferred to communicate without touching. The spider lets the human go and flies to the other end of the station. Jakob desperately follows it, promising to change, and again sees Lenka in the guise of a naiad. He floats in zero gravity, remembering his wife and crying from the sense of realizing the loss. Then he calls Peter and asks him to visit the woman. The friend goes to the boarding house and hands her the quantum phone. Jakob talks about how he loves her and asks for forgiveness for his selfishness. Now he doesn't understand why he neglected the most precious. He wasted his life on nonsense and is not worthy of her. Immediately after the conversation, he hears Hannes' voice again, asking him to rest because he has atoned for his guilt. Jakob asks not to leave him, and the spider admits that it too fears loneliness. But suddenly the man notices that the spider is not feeling well, and it admits that although it escaped from the enemy, it was already too late. They had taken over his body, and suddenly it hugs the astronaut. For the first time in a long time, Jakob falls asleep deeply, and the spider has to wake him up because a great discovery awaits him. It even brings him a tube of hot coffee to bed, after which the astronaut makes the final preparations. He contacts the Czech Space Authority and reports that his mission is dedicated to all the people of Earth, but especially to Lenka. Afterward, he reduces speed and begins collecting samples using special equipment. But then the spider becomes very ill. Jakob abandons his task and tries to help his friend. The equipment gives an error, and Earth commands to cancel the sample collection. But Jakob hears nothing because he sees Hanus in open space. The ship's systems fail one after another, and the control center orders to end the mission and return. But Jakob puts on a spacesuit, takes a bomb, and goes outside. Peter can't understand what's happening and pleads with his friend to return to the ship. However, using the explosion to catch up with the spider, Jakob holds it. Hanus thanks him, but it's all in vain. Soon the enemies will consume him, and Jakob, looking at the surrounding space, remembers the day he almost drowned. Then his father saved him, and now he forgives all his father's sins, and forgives himself. Hanus pulls him to the center of the cloud, where everything is gathered, the beginning and the end, the fluctuation of all times, his past and future, him, his Lenka, and his father. Every promise and punishment, everything is unchangeable and impermanent, but such is the truth of nature. The universe is as it should be. Before the man, Lenka appears again, and Jakob admits that their meeting is a miracle. Just like the meeting with the spider. Jakob hands his friend a can of nut paste he saved for him. The latter thanks him and asks to listen to the silence, after which it disintegrates into millions of particles, consumed by worm-like creatures that destroyed his race. And Lenka on Earth suddenly sees a glowing purple particle in the grass. Night turns into day. Jakob in a spacesuit wades through a transparent stream, above which, on a log, sits Lenka in a mermaid costume asking him to kiss her. Her face becomes the last thing he sees, at least for a moment, because at that time, he sees the lights of a South Korean ship which saves Jakob. Later, he calls his wife Lenka, apologizes, and confesses that if he had known everything earlier, he would never have left, and she would kiss him once more. A fantastic, yet lifelike film. A work-absorbed astronaut had to be millions of kilometers away from his wife and hear a sermon from an extraterrestrial being to understand that family is the most important thing in his life, and one can only hope that he will manage to regain his sense of purpose. The movie begins in Leningrad in 1940. A young woman named Anya works as a seamstress in a factory where a young machinist, Vasily, who is very serious, notices her and even asks her to introduce him to her only relative, her brother Peter. However, Anya asks for a little more time, and the young man agrees to wait until the next day. But as the girl leaves for her lunch break, he quietly follows her, admiring her. Anya walks down the street, looking at a dirigible hovering above, from which German journalists are filming the city below. At this moment, a tram driven by Peter pulls up to an intersection. Suddenly, Anya realizes that a fast-moving truck is about to crash into the tram, and her brother will likely perish. Frozen in fear, she suddenly emits light waves that lift the truck into the air and throw it away from the intersection. The tram's windows shatter, injuring people, but a major accident is averted. This entire incident is captured on film by the journalists in the dirigible. As the shocked people try to recover, Peter jumps out of the tram, grabs Anya, and quickly takes her away. The girl regains consciousness in their shared room. Peter packs their belongings, urging his sister to flee Leningrad, although she is reluctant since they have already had to move several times due to her supernatural abilities manifesting at the most inappropriate times and attracting the attention of the authorities. Peter asks her to control her powers, but Anya is unable to master them as they are beyond her control. At that moment, representatives of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs burst into the room and arrest the siblings. An investigator named Ivan arrives at the scene. He interviews the victims, and one of the women recalls the strange girl standing at the crossroad. Back at the office, Ivan begins interrogating Anya, but she cannot provide any concrete information. She insists it was just an unfortunate accident, and then Ivan shows her photos from their previous residences where strange incidents and destruction occurred, prompting the siblings to move hastily. The investigator is willing to believe she is not a criminal, especially since he has also witnessed something very strange in his life. However, Ivan is unable to elaborate as his superior, Petrov, who turns out to be his father-in-law, takes Anya and leads her to the secret facilities managed by Professor Ilyinsky. The scientist welcomes the girl, explaining that she is special and now they will study her abilities. However, Anya refuses to cooperate until she sees her brother, and Ilyinsky promises to arrange a meeting for them. Meanwhile, Ivan cannot calm down, although Petrov, who is also his father-in-law, demands he forget the incident and focus on other matters. He had already barely managed to suppress his absurd report about an incident in Madrid. Returning home, Ivan tries to tell everything to his wife Vera, but she asks him to take a vacation and forget everything that happened. The action shifts to 1936. A group of Soviet soldiers, including Ivan, engages in battle with Spanish fascists in Madrid. Suddenly, a man in a strict coat and hat, wearing a strange mask, appears before them. Looking at the soldiers, he utters something incomprehensible, after which Ivan's comrades start shooting themselves one by one. Only Ivan finds the strength to shoot at the man in the mask. The man quickly disappears, leaving Ivan amidst his fallen comrades. The year is 1940. A man in a mask named Neumann and his assistant Katerina arrive in Munich, where the woman meets a Jewish boy named Baruch on the street, who plays chess brilliantly. She offers him a ride with them, noting he can always leave if he does not like their school. An orphan agrees and gets into the car, where Neumann utters several hissing words, causing Baruch to fall asleep instantly. Neumann agrees that the boy is brilliant, but by no means possesses superpowers. However, Katerina is determined to help the boy. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Professor Ilyinsky leads Anya to the laboratory where she will be studied, and fulfilling his promise, brings her to a cell to see her brother. Peter again asks her not to show her abilities, and she promises to write to him. Baruch is brought to an ancient castle owned by Neumann. The boy is laid in a hammock in a hall inhabited by many other teenagers, but when the adults leave, he wakes up and is frightened by the dark silhouettes surrounding him. Back in Moscow, Professor Ilyinsky leads Anya to a separate room, more like a cell, and locks her in there. He then reports to Petrov that he has never seen anything like it. The girl is a scientific discovery, a unique case, to which the chief objects. She is a new weapon. Later, Anya is subjected to various tests, but she shows nothing special. Ivan cannot forget the incident, studying everything related to the strange explosion. The video footage of the accident also reaches Neumann, and he decides to fly to the USSR. There, the man is taken to meet with Professor Ilyinsky. Neumann introduces himself as a worker from the Ahnenerbe organization and immediately determines that the professor is terminally ill. He offers to ease his pain if the professor allows him to speak with Anya. Ilyinsky does not believe in his abilities, but Neumann utters something, and glowing waves emanate from him, enveloping the professor, causing him to lose consciousness. Taking advantage of this, Neumann searches his desk and takes some papers. Soon, Ilyinsky regains consciousness, but strangely feels no pain. He agrees to arrange a meeting with Anya and leads the German to the laboratory. Neumann approaches the girl and secretly shows her an execution order for her brother. Then waves of unprecedented force begin to emanate from the girl, literally blowing up the entire laboratory. Neumann grabs her and escapes. Ivan sees from the window a man in a hat whom he immediately recognizes and runs to the laboratory where explosions are heard. But Neumann and the girl are nowhere to be found. The narrative shifts to 1924. In a remote Karelian village, a woman lives with two children, Peter and Anya. One day they go with the village boys into the forest. Suddenly a pack of wolves leaps out at the children. The children freeze in fear, but waves emanate from Anya, scattering the beasts. When the men arrive at the clearing, they find the girl dead. 1940. Petrov enters the devastated laboratory, where people connected by tubes into a single organism and marked with the letter M lie in chairs. At first glance, this structure was not damaged by the explosion, as the injured Ilyinsky lying nearby confirms. The professor reports that Anya caused all this and refuses to continue the experiments. Then, Petrov shoots him. Afterward, he goes to Ilyinsky's colleague, who everyone simply calls Professor Lyubov. Petrov asks her to activate the M Squad. Learning about the professor's death, the woman refuses to help Petrov, but he reminds her of her family, and Lyubov reluctantly agrees. On the train, a customs officer searches Newman's compartment and finds an iron sarcophagus with Anya inside. Unsure of what to do, he goes for help. Meanwhile, Anya envisions her own funeral following the incident with the wolves. Frightened, she comes to, and Newman informs her that he is saving her. Anya tries to run, but the customs officers, who decided to detain the strange German, stop her. However, he utters something, and the military personnel bring their pistols to their own heads. Neumann and Anya leave. At the same time in Moscow, Petrov reports to his colleagues that a member of the Ahnenerbe, which translates to ancestral heritage, Neumann has stolen a valuable exhibit from the USSR, the girl Anya. A squad has already been formed to pursue the German and will depart in a matter of days. Learning of this, Ivan requests to be included, but Petrov, feeling sorry for his daughter, refuses to do so. Neumann leads Anya to a spot where Katerina's car is waiting, and she drives the pair to the castle. It is apparent that the woman does not like Neumann's new toy, but he immediately says that Anya is just like him. At the castle, they are greeted by children whom Neumann calls his army. Anya is escorted to her room, and Newman finds a guest in his office, Admiral Canaris, who is very interested in the scientist's research. But today he has come to express his displeasure with Neumann's sabotage in the USSR, as it could start a war. Newman reassures him and invites him to a formal dinner. Meanwhile, Anya is startled by a sound and sees Baruch in her room, trying to open her window to escape the castle. But Katerina and Newman appear and stop him. While Katerina takes the boy away, Newman tries to convince Anya that the castle is a paradise, and no one wants to leave of their own volition. Katerina brings Baruch to a bedroom, reminding him that he must speak only German and not tell anyone his real name if he wants to live. But when she leaves, the other teenagers attack him. In Moscow, Ivan asks his wife to help him get enrolled in the squad, after which he goes to Professor Lyubov. He is interested in whether hypnosis can make a person do what another wants. The professor asks him not to travel to Germany, but he is determined to find the man in the mask. In the castle, Anya finds Baruch hanging. The boy tries to explain that the others hate him and beat him, therefore he wants to run away. But Anya admits that it was the same for her until she became strong, and he can too. Later they find Neumann in the park, who promises Anya he will teach her to control her power. He explains that he inherited the castle from the person who adopted him, and now it serves as a refuge. He has set up Anya's room according to her taste and hopes she will like it here. Grateful, Anya sits down at the sewing machine, unexpectedly remembering how the villagers burned their house, calling her a witch. Then her brother saved her, though their mother died in the fire. Back in Moscow, Petrov enrolls Ivan in the squad and asks the commander to ensure that he does not return. Leningrad, 1937. Returning from Madrid, Ivan writes in his report everything he witnessed, but Petrov does not believe him, noting that if the soldiers shot themselves, they could be declared deserters. Tired of trying to convince the young man, Petrov takes him to Professor Lyubov. 1940. A special forces unit travels to Germany in a grain car. Ivan warns his comrades about Neumann's peculiarities, but it seems they don't quite believe him. At the castle, the children undergo daily training, while Anya enjoys the long-forgotten peace. In the morning, Katerina brings her a box with a new dress sent by Neumann for her to wear at his birthday party. The girl goes out to the hall where the children are preparing decorations for the evening, and then they head to training. Baruch is afraid of heights and falls from a rope ladder, but no one pities him. After that, it's time for shooting practice, but the boy throws his pistol down and runs to the local cemetery where Neumann finds him. Baruch asks to be let go, but the scientist promises to teach him not to be afraid. Meanwhile, Squad M climbs out of the wagon, and Ivan remembers his training in 1936 before being sent to Madrid. Then his comrades met him coldly because he was the boss's son-in-law, but Ivan earned respect through hard work and cleverness. And now he is on a special mission. Suddenly, they are hailed by an old man who turns out to be their liaison and must take them to the castle. At the same time, Petrov is informed that the squad has successfully crossed the border. Guests start arriving at the castle. Neumann welcomes Canaris and escorts him to the hall where music plays, and ladies and gentlemen drink and talk about the beautiful evening. Neumann himself is enchanted by Anya's beauty, and she gives him a hand-embroidered handkerchief she made for him. Later, guests deliver laudatory speeches in honor of the birthday boy, and he invites Anya to dance to the envy of the present ladies. Canaris notices Katerina's displeasure, but the woman remains cold, rejecting his advances. She dislikes Canaris's interest in their wards, and he tells her that people are already coming for Anya from the USSR. Squad M reaches the forest house of their liaison, who supplies them with weapons and draws a path on a map, but then shots ring out. German soldiers have caught up with the saboteurs. A battle ensues and the Russians win. Later, the commander finishes off the wounded enemies and, unexpectedly for Ivan, shoots the liaison, indicating that they have no orders to return. At the castle, Canaris agrees to play chess with Baruch, and the boy wins. The admiral admires his genius, but upon learning that the boy is Jewish, he pulls out a pistol. Anya sees the man aiming at the child, and her powers activate. Guests watch in horror as everything in the hall begins to rise into the air. The admiral himself is lifted up, but at that moment Neumann grabs the girl by the shoulder. She faints, and Canaris falls to the floor. Everything stops immediately, but people scream and scatter. The furious admiral orders all children to be destroyed within 3 days and departs. Neumann escorts Anya to her room and admires her because today she managed to stop. The girl does not understand why it is necessary to destroy the Jews, and Neumann reminds her that no one pitied them either, as they were not like everyone else. The man returns to his office where Katerina awaits him, but he does not accept her attentions because he is seriously captivated by Anya and hopes to succeed with her. However, Katerina is saddened by this turn in their relationship and reminds him of Canaris's order, but Neumann intends to make a profitable deal. The action shifts to Neumann's childhood when children laughed at him and drove him away. His parents were forced to put a mask with a digital lock on him so he couldn't harm anyone, and the boy suffered greatly from this. One day his father complained to the landlord that his son was hindering his ability to fulfill his duties as a tenant, and the man came to see the unusual child. They explained to him that Neumann scared all the guests and caused his father to lose a finger. The year is 1940. The morning after the dinner, Anya goes out to the hall, but the servants who witnessed yesterday's incident look at her warily. Then the girl goes to the park, where she is met by an armed Katerina, but seeing the guards, she returns to the house. Later, Neumann conducts a meditation for the teenagers, asking Thor to give them strength. Anya sees this and asks for permission to start training. Neumann orders Katerina to stay at the castle and wait for guests, and he takes Anya away. Meanwhile, the squad continues to move through the forest. Soon they find a rubber boat at the prearranged place. Neumann puts Anya on his personal plane and takes her to his parents' house. Landing, they walk across a bridge and suddenly Neumann asks the girl to remember her brother. Her powers activate. Water rises up, carrying fish and creating a reverse waterfall. But then the man calls her, Anya comes to her senses, and everything returns to normal. However, now she can use her powers when she needs to. Soon they enter an old house and Neumann recalls how he was taken from his father's home. Lastly, his mother writes down the password to his mask on a piece of paper, and little Neumann leaves their lives forever. In the present, he tells that his father was a harsh and cruel man, often beating him and his mother, so he promised himself that his child would never be unhappy. The man remembers how his patron removed his mask and wanted to throw it away, but Neumann did not allow it. The man informed him that he would now take care of him, but he must trust him. Soon they arrived at the castle, where the patron confessed that every person has the right to be happy, and the boy lived for the first time like a normal child. But a year later, war came. His patron went away on business, and their home turned into a hospital. Neumann helped as best he could. Once he had to assist in the amputation of a leg. The soldier was in great pain, and then Neumann activated his powers and relieved the poor man of his suffering during the operation. Later he confessed to one of the nurses that he loved her. The adult woman laughed at the boy but said she loved him too. But one day he caught his nurse with one of the recovering soldiers, and in a fit of rage he made the soldier kill himself with a hammer. They caught him, gagged him, tied him up, and took him away from the castle. In 1940 he tells Anya that his parents died, so he is so happy to have found her. The girl lights candles in the fireplace, using her new powers, which delights Neumann. They drink wine and then become close. At night, Anya dreams where Baruch dies and wakes up terrified. She asks Neumann to return to the castle. Meanwhile, the squad reaches the river. One of the soldiers is wounded and runs out of strength. Then he takes his own life so as not to be a burden to his comrades. Only 3 remain, but they still row towards the castle. And there Katerina, who can't sleep, reminisces about the past when she helped her mother, who worked in a psychiatric hospital, where one day they brought in a tied-up boy named Neumann. She then freed him, and he promised never to harm her. The year is 1936, Leningrad. Petrov attends a lecture by Professor Ilyinsky, where he discusses a significant discovery in the field of controlling human memory and emotions. Ilyinsky's colleague, Professor Lyubov, is inspired by the future changes, as people with good mental health will be able to work better and create a brilliant future for themselves and their children. The Project M envisions a new society where happy people with immense productivity and willpower will live. Petrov asks about the use of these discoveries in the military sphere, arguing that if a new society is to be built, it must be able to defend itself. However, Lyubov categorically opposes totalitarianism. After the lecture, Petrov offers Ilyinsky full support for their program if he agrees to operate under military auspices. But Ilyinsky sends him to Lyubov as the ideational inspiration behind the project. However, the woman flatly refuses to cooperate with the military. That same day, she is hit by a car in the street. Later, Petrov returns to Ilyinsky, informing him of the unfortunate accident with his colleague, and Ilyinsky reluctantly agrees to cooperate. Again, 1940-year Germany. The 3 remaining members of the squad reach the castle's territory. Surprised by the lack of security, they enter the premises. Petrov receives a summary of incidents in a specific area of Germany and realizes that everything is going according to plan. His boss is horrified. His people have left a very noticeable trail, which could easily lead to the USSR being accused of provocation. But Petrov assures him that everything was planned this way and there will be no international conflict. At that moment, his daughter calls and he rushes home. The squad members reach the castle and, splitting up, begin to explore the premises. Meanwhile, Petrov finds Vera in a hysterical state. She is going mad with worry for her husband, and the father decides to take action. At the same time in the castle, Katerina reads a book to the children, and seeing her nervousness, they calm the woman. She orders lights out and leaves, just as Ivan enters the hall from the other side. Seeing the children in front of him, the man lowers his weapon and leaves. The children remain motionless. The soldiers continue to explore the castle, and now the squad leader enters the hall with the children. But he does not lower his weapon and prepares to shoot. Then the children attack first. The commander fires in all directions, but the teenagers throw their clothes at him and knock him down. The eldest orders the pistol handed to Baruch to kill the enemy, but the boy cannot shoot the man, and the man manages to wound him with a knife before being killed. The children carry the bleeding Baruch to the bedroom, leaving the soldier's body on the hall floor. The 3rd squad member, a female warrior, finds Katerina's office and engages her in a shootout. Katerina flees, but the woman catches up to her, and they fight. The woman is defeated when Katerina pushes her away. Seeing her opponent unconscious, the German grabs a pistol but doesn't manage to shoot because Ivan appears. Threatening him with a pistol, the woman captures him. In Moscow, Petrov brings his daughter to Professor Lyubov and asks her to erase the girl's memory. Lyubov is outraged by this request, as the love for a husband is the most precious thing in Vera's life. However, under military pressure, she agrees and performs the necessary manipulations, while Petrov's subordinates methodically clear their apartment of photographs and items belonging to Ivan. But one photograph falls under a chest of drawers, and the soldier does not notice it. After the procedure, the girl regains consciousness but does not remember her husband at all. At this time, the teenagers attack Ivan, not noticing Katerina, and wound him in the arm. The woman drives off the aggressive children and escorts the wounded man to Neumann's office, where she admits to Ivan that she recognized him because she had seen him in Madrid. He asked why her master kidnapped Anya. Could it be that he wants to use her in the war? Katerina assures him that he still doesn't understand. People are petty and greedy creatures fighting for power. Neumann is unique. He is ready to seize all power on Earth to save the world from war. Meanwhile, Neumann and Anya arrive at the castle and find a wounded woman on the threshold. The scientist finishes her off with a pistol while Anya runs to the bedroom to the teenagers and finds Baruch dead. At this time, Ivan is bandaging himself while Katerina explains that they teach the children survival by developing their skills, because their destiny is to save the world under Neumann's leadership. The woman offers to help him escape if he will help her. But before Ivan can hear her out, Neumann enters the door. The Russian immediately picks up a pistol and takes the woman hostage. However, the German informs him that he does not care about her fate, which visibly upsets her. At that moment, Anya runs into the office and uses her power to knock Ivan off his feet. But when she recognizes the man, Neumann quickly takes her away, leaving the Russian with Katerina. In Moscow, Professor Lyubov mourns Ilyinsky when Petrov brings her folders with the names of the condemned, whom she can save by including them in Squad M. She remembers how after the accident, Ilyinsky came to her in the hospital. The man was shocked to learn that she had been mutilated by the military, but he was frightened and could not refuse to cooperate. Now the woman is alone and forced to make difficult decisions. She takes out a vial of M activator and recalls Ivan's story about the man in the mask. After his return from Madrid, she worked with his memory, suggesting removing the traumatic memories of his comrades' deaths. But Ivan refused to erase his life. And now the young man is chained in a cell in the castle of the man in the mask. Later, Anya visits him, accusing him of killing Baruch, but the boy denies it, and he is not particularly interested in her fate. He only wants to destroy Neumann because all evil comes from him. He hypnotizes children, turning them into killers. Their conversation is interrupted by Naumann's appearance. After sending Anya away, he thanks the young man for revealing his vulnerability, as he is the only one who could stand up to him. To prove it, the scientist shows the finger shot off by Ivan in Madrid. He too is special, and Neumann really wants the Russian to join his side. Yes, he killed his friends, but it was war. He came to Annanerba to find gifted people. Anya is like him, and they are the future. He asks Ivan to admit why he is immune to his hypnosis. Then Ivan reveals that there is a whole squad like him, Squad M. There are many of them, and they will all be here soon. So Neumann cannot hide. After talking with Ivan, Neumann finds Anya in the castle's backyard. The girl asks him to hand over all affairs to Katerina and to leave this place forever. But Neumann does not want to run because they are extraordinary people, and when they are together they are unbeatable. He asks for her help in defending their new home. Later, he thanks Katerina for managing the situation and confesses that he is glad she was not hurt during the Russian raid. Meanwhile, Anya remembers how in Moscow she wrote letters to her brother while locked up in the laboratory. She used to give them to the professor, but she could not have imagined that he read her letters to Peter, who was undergoing mental processing as a participant in Squad M. At this time, she burns them in the backyard of the castle, hoping that life will give her a chance to start over. Later, the castle's inhabitants conduct a funeral rite for Baruch. The teenagers carry the boy's body to the seashore, where the cemetery is located, and burn it on a ritual pyre. Anya is shocked by the number of children's graves and realizes that Ivan was telling the truth. Katerina urges her to leave and save herself. Anya runs to Ivan's cell and asks him to tell her what he saw in Madrid that was so special. The boy talks about the death of his comrades and Neumann's chilling whisper, but the German doesn't know that he just had a misfire. He is not special and survived only because of the pistol's malfunction, but if Neumann finds out, he will kill him immediately. And only Anya can stand up to him. Out of the darkness comes Katerina, who has heard everything. She will let them go if they leave forever. Neumann is planning to sell the children to Canaris, and Anya can do nothing about it. They are weapons, and it is high time the Russian understood this. But Anya runs away while Katerina frees Ivan from his chains and advises him to make sure the German never finds them. Meanwhile in Moscow, Petrov enjoys his daughter's good mood, hoping she will meet another man, marry, and give him grandchildren. The girl is lively and cheerful, unaware that the photo under the dresser awaits its moment. At this time, Neumann orders the Russian man to be killed, and he goes to look for Anya. Meanwhile, Katerina leads Ivan to her car, where Neuman's guard catches up with them. He engages in a fight with the Russian, and when he is about to kill him, Katerina attacks the guard. The guard is much stronger, and Katerina has to shoot. The teenagers hear the sound and run into the courtyard while Katerina puts Ivan in the car and drives him away from the estate. Neumann finds Anya at the cemetery. The girl asks him to let the children go, but he refuses. They are insignificant to him because he hopes to build a new world using their combined powers. Moreover, they will definitely have a son who will be the strongest and greatest on the planet. Hearing this, Anya wants to leave. Then Neumann sees Katerina's car and realizes what she is about to do. He puts on his quantum mask, which greatly amplifies the power of his voice, and begins to speak, while Ivan stands on the car step and aims an assault rifle at him. The mask works. Katerina's car loses control and crashes from a high cliff into the water, but Ivan manages to jump from the step and survives. Then, members of the second squad M, who were heading to the castle, covering for the distracting maneuvers of the first squad, open fire on Neumann. But the soldiers are programmed for total destruction, and one of them engages in a fight with Ivan, not realizing he is an ally. The young man has to kill the soldier. Neumann asks Anya to activate her power, and the girl begins to do so when she recognizes one of the soldiers as her brother. Neumann is knocked down by her force, rocks crash from the sky, and the girl runs to Peter, realizing that this time he is indeed dead. Anya's powers activate again when Neumann falls from Ivan's shot. The girl mourns her brother as teenagers appear on the road. Ivan grabs Anya and drags her away while the children pick up Neumann's body and carry it into the castle. The Russians run to the airplane and manage to take off at the last moment. 9 months later, Neumann, who survived the injury, listens to Hitler's speeches and experiments with a new kind of influence on people, broadcasting his voice through radio equipment. Meanwhile, in Anya's native village, a bearded Ivan arrives from the woods as his woman is about to give birth. Pregnant Anya is dragged into the village where women come to help. As the birth proceeds, an announcement about the start of the war with Germany is broadcast from the speakers. Later, surrounded by streams of power, Anya gives birth to a healthy baby boy. Neumann is immediately informed by a fortune-telling girl. Then one of the villagers recognizes Anya and hurries to tell his fellow villagers whom they have just helped. But Ivan stops him when bombers appear in the sky, from which a large number of paratroopers descend. In the Middle East, a man appears who calls himself the Messiah and gathers crowds of believers in the new Advent. Is he sent by God, or is he a dangerous fraud seeking to disrupt the world's geopolitical order? The story is told through the eyes of people from vastly different backgrounds surrounding the enigmatic man. For 85 days, enemies have besieged Damascus, where a humanitarian catastrophe is growing. There is no food or water, and many people are dying in the shelling. And one day, 2 teenagers, Jabril and Samir, who have lost their families, see a man in yellow clothes on the street, urging people not to worry about the city's fall because God has predetermined that it will not happen. Salvation in the form of a sandstorm is approaching, and people run under the onslaught of the elements while the preacher does not leave and repeats that salvation is already close. The sandstorm breaks the supply chains of the enemy troops and they retreat, and the city is saved. FBI agent Eva Geller watches the broadcast of everything that happened, paying attention to this strange man whom people call Al-Masih, and learns that he is leading hundreds of his followers into the desert. At night, the men talk about faith and religion around the fire. Al-Masih asks questions and is strict with those who do not want to think about his questions. Now all of humanity is on the brink, and for people to survive, they must cling to him. After this conversation, the man walks away from the people and stands for a long time looking at the sky, giving the impression that he's talking to God. The teenagers who came with him from Damascus remember how he preached while they hid in the basement, and suddenly Al-Masih calls one of them, Jabril, and tells him that each soul has its own star. He saw light in the boy, and soon Allah will lay a mission on him. Meanwhile, Eva is trying to find out which officers know something about the new Messiah and begins gathering information. Soon she learns that after walking 65 kilometers through the sands, the people reached the borders of Israel and stopped at the fence. Half of the followers believe that Al-Masih has led them to flight, but he orders them to gather all their weapons and bury them. He himself passes through the barbed wire fence, where he is arrested by Israel's border service. An agent from Israel's internal security agency, Aviram Dahan, is called in to interrogate him. However, the detained man refuses to reveal his real name, calling himself a messenger, and impresses the agent by calling him by name and revealing unexpected details from the agent's life that no one except the agent himself could know. Aviram is particularly touched by the incident with the boy that the Messiah reminds him of. Dahan completes the interrogation and leaves the room, destroying the video recording of the interrogation. He then goes to his partner to find out if he has told anyone about what happened in the desert, but his partner remains silent about it. As Aviram gets into his car, he suddenly sees a man with a bag over his head on the back seat, but realizes that it is a flashback to a tragedy from long ago. Early in the morning, the agent returns to work and is surprised to discover that Al-Masih has escaped from custody. Meanwhile, in the small American town of Dili, local preacher Felix Aguero greets his congregation, while the FBI decides to assist Israeli authorities in finding Al-Masih and discovering who he really is. This is why Eva Geller flies to Israel, and her insistence Aviram is summoned to the office, but he cannot explain why he deleted the video recording. He behaves provocatively, not understanding why he should be accountable to the American woman. Meanwhile, an international conflict is brewing in the world as people who were led by the Messiah to the border of Israel are starving. Even after hearing about his escape, they decide to stay because they believe in his return. One day, volunteers bring food and water, and the Messiah's followers notice that the police are looking for someone in the crowd. They realize that Al-Masih has escaped, which causes unprecedented rejoicing. At the same time, Al-Masih delivers a sermon on the Temple Mount, using apocalyptic phrases about the end of history and calling on those who are willing to go to God's judgment to step forward. A young boy comes forward, but the sermon is interrupted by the Israeli police who try to arrest the Messiah. The operation fails due to a shot that hits the child who has come out. The people start screaming, driving away the invaders. But then Al-Masih lays his hands on the boy, who then stands up unharmed, showing the bloody bullet to the public. The people consider this a miracle while Al-Masih disappears into the crowd. Eva hears the news on the radio and asks to be taken to the scene of the incident. Meanwhile, Muslims also discuss the Messiah's sermon and are quite unhappy with his interpretation of Allah's teachings. The people in the camp cannot understand why their newly found Jesus has abandoned them. And Eva notices the surveillance, and her pursuer turns out to be Aviram, who wants to know why she's meddling in something that's not her business. But Eva is not going to back down. She studies the recordings from the CCTV cameras and notices the strange disappearance of the Messiah. And it's still unclear who fired the shot. She tries to find the injured boy, while in Jerusalem the electricity is shut off to quell the unrest. The agents arrive at the boy's address, but it turns out that his family has left, scared of the crowd's interest. Reports of the incident on the Temple Mount are being shown around the world, and one of them is seen by Father Felix, while his daughter Rebecca dreams of running away from home. Meanwhile, Jabril sees a flickering light at the fence and goes there, while Eva finds Al-Masih in a photo from Jordan. Palestinian girls bring food for the hungry and promise to help people. Jabril goes to get assistance when a man who appears hits him on the head and takes him away from the fence. That same night, the pastor's daughter Rebecca runs away from home, while her disillusioned father decides to burn down his church. The man takes a canister of gasoline and a lighter and heads towards the building. At that moment, a message about an approaching tornado comes to his phone, which was left at home, and the pastor's wife goes to find him. Sirens begin to sound in the town, and the residents hurry to the only shelter, the church, as the tornado begins its deadly circle. Father Felix calls his daughter, hoping she's nearby, and suddenly sees the motionless figure of Al-Masih nearby. Later on, a video of Rebecca's rescue appears in social media, which is intercepted by CIA agents and blocked from spreading. But how did the Messiah end up in America? Soon, Federal Agent Will arrives at the scene. The man is shaken by the sight of the completely destroyed town, where only one building, the church, survived, and where Al-Masih is currently located, explaining to the astonished priest that he came here by God's will. Felix is shaken because he was planning to burn down the building that ended up saving everyone's lives. At that moment, Agent Will enters and arrests the Messiah. The priest swears to get Al-Masih out of jail, while Aviram interrogates Jabril in the hopes of finding out the Messiah's whereabouts. But the boy does not know. The agent wants to understand why people follow the men unknown to anyone and promises to prove that there is no God. Meanwhile, Felix turns to a lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union for help because everything that happened was not a mere coincidence. And Eva arrives in Texas to question Al-Masih, but his lawyer manages to obtain a ban on the meeting. The situation worsens when one of the videos about what happened in the town circumvents their social media block and reaches the mass media. Al-Masih's lawyer tells him that while the charge of illegal entry into the United States is likely to be upheld in court, she can get him out of the federal immigration detention center where he's being held. When the lawyer leaves the detention center, Agent Will informs Eva of this and she rushes to see him. However, during their conversation, Al-Masih turns the situation around in his favor again by showing that he knows her name and sympathizes with her losses, as her mother and husband have passed away. He realizes his responsibility for those who followed him and is willing to help all who are suffering, including her, but Eva doesn't believe his sincerity and runs away, failing to notice the recording device under the table. Returning to her hotel room, Eva talks to her boss, who informs her that Israel is demanding Al-Masih extradition and the state prosecutor will seek permission for it. Later, Al-Masih is taken to court where he is charged, which he admits to, and requests asylum. Eva goes to the lawyer, trying to convince her to stop fighting for the man's release to prevent his extradition. After all, if he returns to Israel, he will be imprisoned, but the lawyer refuses to talk about it. Meanwhile, Aviram again refuses to reveal what happened during the interrogation, whose recording he erased. He's suspended from the case and a hearing is scheduled. At this time, Felix tells his wife about his departure because he's needed by the Messiah. A multitude of Al-Masih's followers gather outside the courthouse. The hearing begins and the lawyer explains that the man cannot return to Israel where he will be persecuted for religious reasons. But the prosecutor claims that the man is lying about being a Muslim because he does not pray 5 times a day as required. The Messiah responds that he belongs to all denominations because everyone walks under the same sun. This causes a storm of emotions around the world, even in high-level offices. The assistant to the President of the United States tries to pressure the judge to deport the unwanted man, and the judge promises to consider it. Meanwhile, Samir finds his friend Jabril abandoned by Aviram in the desert, and he considers it a true miracle that he survived. The next day, the court makes the shocking decision to grant asylum to Mr. Masih, allowing him to leave the courthouse as a free man, with the car of the Venerable Iguero waiting for him outside. People all over the world are talking about the Messiah and beginning to believe in the miracles he performs. In Dili, those seeking healing begin to gather. The Reverend tries to organize their accommodation while Samir faithfully tends to Jabril. The Messiah brought by the pastor settles in isolation from people in a small tent where only Felix has access. One day, the preacher dares to ask Al-Masih about his future plans, and he says he does not know what will happen next. After all, Felix brought him here, and this instills despair in the preacher's soul. He thought that the Messiah was acting according to a preconceived plan. That same evening, Agent Will comes to Eva and shows her a recording of a conversation with Al-Masih. Then he shows her a book by one of the radicals, Wallace, about cultural terrorism, in which the words of the Messiah are repeated verbatim. It turns out that Al-Masih is acting according to this scenario, the goal of which is the destruction of the existing order. Meanwhile, things are going badly for the refugees who remain at the Israeli border without water and food, and soon Samir begins to wonder where Jabril's strong faith comes from. He calls his friend crazy for refusing medical help as his injuries could be fatal, and accuses him of an abnormal love for the Messiah. One day, Aviram's wife notices his car, which has been parked near their house for 3 days, and begins to search for the man, who at this time arrives in Texas and buys a gun at the gun store. And in Dili, every evening people gather together hoping that Al-Masih will come out to them. But the man remains in his tent, bringing Felix into a state of confusion that spills over into a sermon for all who have come. At this time, 2 residents of Dili finally find their dog crushed by furniture during the hurricane and try to free it. Al-Masih comes out of his tent just as armed Aviram approaches it. The Messiah calmly looks into the eyes of his killer, and Aviram lowers his gun and looks at the departing man's back. The people notice the Messiah, who is walking towards the house where the man decides to shoot the poor dog as it is suffering greatly. The boy asks Al-Masih to save his dog, but he takes a gun and shoots the dog, causing the boy's anger and pain, and then he leaves the town. At this time, Eva catches up with Aviram and he confesses that he wanted to kill the Messiah, who at that time calls pastor's daughter Rebecca to come with him. Meanwhile, the refugees decide that the Messiah has abandoned them and they decide to return to the city, but Jabril stays behind. In the morning, the young man dreams of his deceased mother, who turns into the Messiah and reaches out to him. At the same time, the Texas police ask the pilgrims not to come to Dili as the city is completely destroyed. Dissatisfied, the people are ready to expel Al-Masih and Father Felix. They write protest messages about the false prophet on the church walls. Meanwhile, Eva learns the true name of the Messiah, Payam Gul-Shari, and he has a brother who works at the university. The Messiah tells Father Felix that it is time to get on the road, persuading Felix that this is his destiny. The pastor decides to take his family with him, which upsets his wife but pleases his daughter. Father Felix leads a column of cars that follow the Messiah wherever he leads them. The number of cars is constantly growing, and soon it begins to count in the hundreds. Eva also returns to Texas to follow Al-Masih, and one night sees him come out to make a call from a payphone on the street. At her request, Agent Will requests a copy of the telephone conversation. The next day the column continues on its way. Stopping for a break, the pastor hears news of the crisis on the border where the refugees from Palestine are still waiting for their fate. Rebecca takes a picture of the Messiah standing by a road sign in Washington and posts it on social media. In the morning, the column sets off, and Felix learns from the posts that their path leads to the U.S. Capitol. At the same time, Eva checks everything she can find about the Messiah and comes across information that he studied at the same university where the notorious terrorist Wallace taught, whose book Al-Masih quoted during the interrogation. Professor Wallace hacked the stock exchange and then fled to Russia during the investigation into his actions. This means that the case of the alleged attack is completely within Eva's jurisdiction. The huge column arrives in Washington, and Al-Masih goes to the Lincoln Memorial, while Jabril has a vision of his late mother and Al-Masih. The Messiah speaks about the unity of people in the world around them, and Jabril suddenly stands up as if hearing his speech. Al-Masih asks to look at himself and his neighbors. Jabril strips naked. The Messiah stands before the nation and looks at them so that they finally look at him. It's too late to kneel, time is up. Jabril walks towards the border. Al-Masih heads for the water. Jabril walks non-stop until a soldier's gun barrel is pressed against his chest, and Al-Masih walks on the water. The Israelis retreat, and Jabril leads the refugees. Hundreds of amazed spectators follow the Messiah's journey and record this on their telephone cameras. The world is buzzing after witnessing the miracles of Al-Masih, and even the Congregation of the Causes of Saints is considering the case. Everywhere there are clashes between the followers and the opponents of the newly emerged Messiah. People are sending money to Father Felix, who intends to build the Church of Al-Masih with it. Meanwhile, Jabril arrives in Western Jordan, where he is welcomed as a liberator. The refugees are brought to a secluded house where they will be given food and shelter. But Jabril is separated from the others as he openly declares his allegiance to Al-Masih. Meanwhile, Eva reports her findings to his superiors. The Messiah has a fairly long trail of connections to banned organizations and, most importantly, to Wallace, who is now hiding in Moscow. Senior officials in the U.S. government are concerned about the popularity of Al-Masih, so the head of the White House staff demands that the CIA do everything possible to discredit him. But Eva reminds them, this is not just terrorism, this is a new level of destabilizing society. Meanwhile, the society is discussing the Messiah with ever-increasing fervor. People are divided into those who unquestionably believe in him and those who consider him a false prophet. Felix preaches on behalf of Al-Masih and reminds people of the importance of faith. The Lord has chosen them specifically, and it is important to understand why. At this time, a woman with a terminally ill child sneaks into the hotel of the Messiah, and the man agrees to take the girl, but only alone. However, his room is under 24-hour surveillance. Meanwhile, the young refugees begin to learn different sciences, among which religion is at the forefront. Sheikh personally comes to Jabril to understand the depth of his faith, and the young man confidently answers that he unquestionably believes in the Messiah. Meanwhile, Eva discusses the Messiah's water-walking feat with Aviram. After all, Jesus did the same thing. He performed tricks and attracted supporters. The man is impressed. She speaks like a true Jew. Agent Will continues to monitor the Messiah's room and one day witnesses a girl knocking on his door, praying for healing. But the man immediately understands the true purpose of her visit. The girl has come to seduce him. He reveals her soul, pitying the woman who sells her body, and from this her soul melts and dies. The girl admits that she was paid for the visit and cries from the moving words of the Messiah, who confesses to her the eternal love of God for his children. These words bring tears to Agent Will's eyes, who is watching the scene. At that time, Rebecca runs out of her parents' room and sees the Messiah escorting the girl out of his own room. The girl runs away and Al-Masih catches up to her on the street. He tries to explain her special place next to him, and the girl shares her observations that the world seems to be on the brink of something grand. The prophet turns to Rebecca and asks her to do something unimaginable, and she promises to do anything he asks. Meanwhile, the CIA manages to find Al-Masih's brother, who reveals that their parents were of different faiths and died early. The boys were raised by their uncle, a professional illusionist, and Al-Masih always loved being the center of attention. The uncle was a tough man, but he taught the boys everything he knew: English, literacy, and most importantly, how to perform tricks. And at that moment, someone puts a dark bag over Al-Masih's head as he enters his room. The man finds himself in the office of the President of the United States, standing before the head of state and demanding the withdrawal of all US troops from around the world using the president's sincere faith. The politician is shocked. It's simply impossible, since the American troops are used precisely as peacekeepers, and if they are not present, there will be chaos in the countries under their control. However, the Messiah lists the names of countries and cities where Americans have been waging wars. He offers the president the chance to go down in history as a true peacemaker saving the world. And he says that the history has ended and the world will soon start anew. Meanwhile, Eva learns that a few years ago, Al-Masih was placed in a psychiatric clinic and goes to the college where the men studied. But the director can't remember anything particularly noteworthy except for his thesis. Eva goes to the archives, but the thesis is not there. In Jordan, the Sheikh shows Jabril an article in a newspaper about the miracles of Al-Masih and asks him to give a speech at the upcoming celebration. The boy must become the leader of the new generation in the struggle for Palestinian independence. The next day, Al-Masih announces to the media about his meeting with the president, and this infuriates Felix, who believes that he should have been informed about it. The president also faces similar attacks. He is heavily guarded against this freak, but he himself goes to the meeting. However, the man interrupts all conversations. He must first think about the people. Angered, Felix expresses his grievance to Al-Masih, and the letter suggests that he kneel before him if he truly believes that he is the Messiah. The preacher thinks it over as the Messiah leaves the room. On the other hand, Agent Will begins to unquestionably believe in Al-Masih and quits his job. Meanwhile, Eva receives the call logs she requested. That same evening, Aviram asks Al-Masih about his family and mocks him, offering to walk on water again. But the man only smiles in response and asks a counter question: why isn't Aviram leaving? The agent can't answer. The president talks to Al-Masih again and he informs him that there is no more time to think. At that moment, water begins to flood the president's feet. Upon waking up, the man learns about an unprecedented flood destroying the US coastline. Later, the daughter of the Reverend Iguero tells him that Al-Masih came to Texas for her, not for her father. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, a guard confesses that he was the one who freed the Messiah from prison, not Aviram Dahan. That same night, the girl hired by the president's assistant to compromise Al-Masih returns all the money she received for it. She doesn't care whether he's real or not. What matters to her is that he's a very good person. Meanwhile, the president flies over the affected areas and, in addition to providing material assistance, urges people to pray and hope for the help of the Lord. At the same time, the pastor's wife asks Al-Masih why he chose their family. He says that faith can be found everywhere, and he wants the same thing that the Lord wants, the flood. Meanwhile, in Jordan, the Sheikh is teaching Jabril about the speeches and Palestine's independence. It's very difficult for the illiterate boy to remember unfamiliar words, but the Sheikh is insistent. His friends are also being heavily influenced at this time, with religious ideas being drilled into their heads. Meanwhile, Reverend Felix asks a famous showman to include Al-Masih in his program. After all, it's a chance to speak to the multimillion audience. Eva checks all the numbers on the list and finds one that Al-Masih calls frequently and talks to the caller for quite some time. Meanwhile, the President of the United States is informed of the buildup of Russian troops on the border with Latvia and is demanded to make a tough decision. On that day, Eva finds Al-Masih to tell him that she knows about his diagnosis, Messiah complex, given to him in the psychiatric clinic, and about his uncle, the magician. She thinks someone is using him and promises to find and arrest the puppeteer. And he confirms that he knows Wallace, who is still his friend despite being accused of terrorism. After that, Felix tells Al-Masih about the invitation to television and he agrees, but only if the Reverend brings his daughter with him. In the evening, Eva talks to her father and is amazed to learn that her own father believes that Al-Masih is the Messiah of the end of times. Meanwhile, it turns out that the complex in the Badia is a terrorist training camp, and Samira is being prepared for the role of a suicide bomber. Meanwhile, Eva decides to act on her own and dials the number that Al-Masih constantly calls. She hears Wallace's voice in response. So his theories about Al-Masih's connection to the terrorist are confirmed, but during the conversation the man refutes all her conclusions. It's a pity, but she doesn't understand what's going on. And of the two of them, he is not the most dangerous one. The woman flips to his book again, reads the dedication on the title page and has an epiphany. Meanwhile, the president requests an analysis of full withdrawal of American troops from Eastern Europe. Eva goes to her boss. Wallace's book is the work of Al-Masih, so it's actually the opposite. The recognized terrorist is a disciple of the Messiah. In the meantime is the day of the television appearance. Al-Masih and Rebecca prepare for their performance. At the mosque, many believers come to listen to Jabril's first speech. The boy is very nervous, but the sheikh is nearby and guides him. The show host warms up the audience before the Messiah's appearance on stage, while Samira is also being taken to the mosque. But just before going on stage, the Messiah leaves the studio and gets into a car, while Samira puts on the suicide bomber belt. The audience demands the Messiah's appearance and Rebecca takes the stage. Jabril starts his speech about the Messiah simultaneously with Rebecca, while Al-Masih is driving in Aviram's car. The teenagers repeat his words to the audiences, "We are all one people." At that moment, Samir enters the mosque, shows the explosive device attached to his chest and raises the button. Looking into Jabril's eyes, he can't bring himself to press the button. However, Samir's mentor remotely activates the bomb vest. Rebecca suddenly loses consciousness in the studio. A powerful explosion rocks the mosque. The action moves back several years, when Aviram and his partner kidnapped, interrogated and killed an underage son of one of those who had organized an explosion in which Aviram's mother died. But it turned out that the boy was not the man's son at all, and it is still haunting the agent. In the present, he himself is driving the Messiah to the airport to deliver him to Israel. After the mosque bombing, the victims are given help. Unconscious Jabril is carried out on a stretcher. The same thing happens to Rebecca. Meanwhile, Eva Geller learns that Al-Masih has been kidnapped. The CIA tracks the plane on which he's being taken, unaware that it was all done on the orders of the president's assistant. Rebecca wakes up and tells her father that the Messiah is gone, and he will not return. Jabril wakes up in the back of a truck and sees a dead man next to him. He squeezes his hand and the fingers twitch under his palm. Eva finds out that the plane with the Messiah has taken off from a government airfield, and her boss tries to pressure higher-ups to find out the plane's destination, threatening to tell the president about everything that has happened and thus driving the country's leader's assistant into a corner. At the same time, in the sky, Al-Masih talks to Aviram, persuading him to free his conscience because God still loves him, and that people always choose between good and evil, and the last thing he will see before he dies is the face of that boy. Meanwhile, the president's assistant decides to reveal Al-Masih's true name to the press and the folder with his dossier, highlighting his mental illness and the fact that he was raised by an illusionist. In the sky, the plane begins to experience severe turbulence. There is an explosion in the tail, and Aviram sees the face of the deceased boy in front of him, whose face is being covered by the Messiah's hands. In the command center, Eva is informed that the plane's signals have disappeared from the radar. She realizes that a tragedy has occurred. On TV, news reports reveal the Messiah's real name and biography, causing confusion among Al-Masih's followers. After hearing everything, Felix leaves the hospital. Jabril also watches Messiah's brother talk about his ability to perform magic tricks. Eva accuses the president's assistant of destroying the diplomatic plane, but he warns her to watch her tongue. The woman is overwhelmed because the entire operation has collapsed and she cannot prove anything. Meanwhile, Father Felix arrives at his church and sets it on fire. He no longer believes in anything. Meanwhile, Aviram wakes up in the middle of blooming poppies and sees the Messiah above him. Then a local boy appears before him, offering him a flask of water and enthusiastically stating that the man has performed the miracle. He resurrected Aviram and another man. They both were unquestionably dead, with gray faces and flies crawling over them. Then he touched them and they came back to life. The agent watches in amazement as his partner bows to the perfectly unharmed Messiah standing in front of him. The film is a story about the coming of the Messiah, the prophet, in the modern world. It is an interesting and easy-to-understand film with deep thoughts expressed by Al-Masih in conversations with completely different people, ranging from an illiterate boy to the President of the United States. On the one hand, it is a weird combination, but on the other hand, it is quite understandable as the Messiah claims that we all walk under one sun.